Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested.
And it's Jeremy from Tested.
Welcome to Projections, our show about virtual reality and all the devices that's going to take you there. Today we have our review of the Oculus Go. Facebook Oculus was able to send us an early review unit, and we've been using it for the past week, and we can say it's out today.
It is out today in many stores, right? You can actually go and buy them right now?
Yep.
So you had it for a number of days, and then I took it for the weekend on vacation. Like, I feel like I gave it a real good use case, where I took it to a hotel, and that was the first time I ever got to use it. Well, this one anyway, was when I walked into the hotel room. My family was unpacking. We finished. Everyone like finally crashed on the couch, and I took it and put it on my head, and I was somewhere else.
Isn't that the promise of VR?
And that, like, I couldn't do that with a Rift. Sure. I'm not taking my base stations, my computer and my, the cameras and the headset with me. But this, all-inclusive.
Yeah, so for some of you out there, you may have never put on a VR headset. We are champions of VR. We are sold on this technology. But I think this is Facebook and Oculus's first product that they think can reach a mainstream audience. So it's important for you out there, if this may be your first VR device, to know your terms, define what this is exactly. So on the high end of VR, what we've been using on our desktops and our computers, they're headsets like the Oculus Rift and the Htc Vive that run off the processing power of your computer.
And they're tethered for that reason.
They're tethered for that reason.
You have a cable that comes off of the back of your headset, and it runs down across your floor and into your computer.
And this generation of virtual reality offers what we call 6 degrees of freedom. Not only can you look around by rotating your head, you can move your body around. They're tracking your hands, your controllers, and it gives you a sense of presence in a virtual environment. Now, to accomplish that, you need a relatively strong computer for the processing power, and you also need a way to detect the world.
Well, you certainly need more technology than is incorporated into this unit.
This
is only 3 degrees of freedom. So so you can basically look in any direction. You just can't move in any direction. And the same goes for the controller. It can point in any direction, and you can, aim and touch, but moving it through space does nothing.
For all intents and purposes, it's very much like Gear VR or Google Daydream device, where you would put your phone in some type of shell with optics and access these type of mobile VR apps in the VR experience, except the big difference being, of course, this is an all-inclusive package. You don't need to put your phone in there, which is why that $200 price point seems mightily attractive.
I think that's the first time we've mentioned it. It's all about that $200 price point. I mean, that is why it is 3 degrees of freedom. But it's also a lot for $200.
Yeah, so what you have on the inside, what's running this headset, is the equivalent of a Samsung phone from a year ago. Not this generation of mobile processors, but last year's Qualcomm processors, but with pretty good display and optics, which are a huge part of the virtual reality experience. The display here is a 2560 by 1440 display, which is higher resolution than you'd find in the Oculus Rift, a little lower than you'd find in something like the Vive Pro. I'd say it lands somewhere in the middle, but uses Oculus's latest optics, the lenses that let you peer into that display, which make it actually a pretty good VR experience.
Yeah, it's actually, when you put it on, you notice the difference. Plus, the screen itself is not a pentile display. The pixels are not arranged in triangles. They're arranged in a grid, as you would expect on your computer. So it's a nice grid, a nice even look to the screen, and the pixel density has been improved. So the amount of what they call the screen door effect, the space between the pixels, which you can still see, is minimized in this.
Yeah. The optics, which is the lenses that let the image warp around your face, give it about the same field of view as the Oculus Rift, about 100 degrees. But because this is using one panel in like your phone turned sideways, as opposed to 2 separate discrete panels like you find in the Rift or the Vive, you get to see a little bit more of the edges, I think, of that panel.
It's not a fully circular image in each eye. You see some hard edges to it. That does not distract me. I'm okay with that. I'm actually kind of happy that I can see the whole panel in some respects, because that means that I'm not losing those pixels. However, you did point out that you can't see the ones in the middle.
Yeah, you may be losing a little bit of fidelity.
Yeah, but the overall takeaway is the image is clear. The new optics give it a slightly wider, in my opinion, sweet spot for the focus. where you get this image in the center that's really nice and resolved, and then it tends to blur as it goes out towards the edges. Now, you get that with any VR headset, but with the new optics, I feel like it's slightly improved.
We also didn't notice any of the God rays effects, this visual artifact where if you're looking at a really bright image, a white image, you would see these God rays coming at you. It's very noticeable in the Oculus Rift. Here, significantly diminished, but I think as a trade-off, you actually notice more chromatic aberration. That's when you see the color split between the red, green, and blue toward the edges of the lenses.
This is something that they compensated for with the original Rift using software, and I wonder if that isn't something that this will evolve as well, where they'll learn how to tweak that in code, where they actually push the red and the blue pixels out a little bit further on purpose, knowing that they'll bend backwards.
One final technical point with the imagery is that this panel runs at 60 frames a second. It's 60 hertz, or can go up to 72 hertz, as opposed to the 90 hertz we're used to on the desktop displays.
And it doesn't sound like much, it's 12 frames a second, but it actually makes a difference. I mean, I noticed the difference between 60 in Catan, where the white seemed to flicker a little bit to me, and when we switched to a 72 hertz game, it seemed smoother to me. So maybe it's just that little bit more that I needed in order to sense a smooth image. They also pointed out, Oculus did, that 72 is a multiple of 24, so that if you're watching a movie, app developers might choose that frame rate just to get a nice, not drop any frames.
And so while this may have some technical equivalents to some of the other mobile headsets, one of the benefits to Oculus making it all themselves is they get to optimize the hardware and the software. And I think there are definitely a lot of optimizations going here in terms of the heating. It doesn't feel like it ever overheats for me.
And no active cooling. So
and no active cooling. And also trying to get that consistent frame rate. They have a lot of software tricks, which you sometimes can see through when there are a little bit of visual artifacts to make it feel like a smooth experience. You're not dropping any frames.
It's also worth pointing out that this headset, unlike Gear VR, which I suppose they do have a speaker, this headset has two speakers. So they have stereo speakers, one on either side, and it projects backwards along this band and reflects into your ear, which is just handy if you don't have your headphones, right there with you. They always want you to be able to hear even the menu sounds. It gives you a sense of feedback, and it's handy to have. It's not private. Whatever you hear out of this, everyone else around you can hear as well. And certainly your ears aren't covered by any kind of headphone, as it would be on one of the desktop HMDs. So it's not like you're isolated either. Luckily, there is a headphone jack on the side, 1/8 inch right there. So if you want to plug in your earbuds or whatever, you do that, it turns off the speakers and you're isolated.
And then you also notice that the back is it's a floppy strap. It's not a rigid strap, which I think you have pros and cons there. The whole thing is light enough where if you just use this rubberized strap, it will stay secure for the type of easy movements.
It's a throwback to the original developer kits.
Yes.
That Oculus made. And those were all the same style, and people used them and were happy enough that their chief competitor, HTC, came out with the HTC Vive, which used a similar strap.
And I think with this strap, it also makes it a little more compact, easier to just throw in your bag, as opposed to having a bigger headset.
That's a good point.
That you can't collapse.
However, having used it for the past weekend, and watching an entire movie in there and trying to spend some real quality time in there, I would say that the strap is one of the effects of having a $200 price point. I think if it cost more, we would probably see a rigid strap, because that's something Oculus knows from making the Rift is an important element to removing that weight that's on the front of your face and supporting it better by your skull, or in some respects strapping it to your head so that it's not resting on your forehead and your nose. I found that this did that a little too much for my taste, so that I lost the sense of comfort unless I physically held on to this part of the strap and pulled it backwards.
Right.
That would lift it off my face. I can almost guarantee you that there will be rigid straps available for this, if not by Oculus, by someone on Kickstarter.
Oculus is also, not for launch, but in the near future, going to offer some lenses, corrective lenses for the headset as well. So if you wear glasses, you won't need to put your glasses on to have clear vision. Although, with this facial interface, I was able to use my glasses without any problem.
Yeah, it seemed everyone I tested it with also who wore glasses, they also wore them, and there wasn't a problem with that. With some of the other VR headsets, there's just not room for the glass frames, right? Just to be clear about the augmented lenses that Oculus is going to sell, they won't replace these lenses. They're going to go on top of them.
Yeah.
So it's almost as if they're your glasses, but they will I would expect, mesh with those lenses very, very well.
Yep. And then finally, the controller. In addition to the headset being just 3 degrees of freedom, and we'll talk about those experiences in just a bit, the controller is also just 3 degrees of freedom. It's very much like, the Wiimote, the very first gen Nintendo Wii controller.
Well, but the Wiimote could do positional because it was also tracked by
the IR.
The sensor bar.
Yeah. This has just rotation.
But you know what? People who tried this, they didn't know that, and they didn't often care. Like if you're playing, there's a ping pong game in there, people are just swinging it around as if it matters. It really doesn't. This is all you have to do, and you're playing the game just as well. But it's up to the app developers to make assumptions based on what movements the player is going to be doing. Obviously, a full 6 degree of freedom lends to a more flexible experience, but $200.
Right, and so those experiences that you can use on the go. It's binary compatible with all the applications made for the Gear VR. So out of the gate, there's a lot of applications that either Facebook and Oculus have made or third-party developers have made that already work here, but they're also launching with some new experiences. There's some default programs. There's also a video player. They have what's called the Oculus Gallery, and this is your ability to view photos, whether they're 360 photos, 180 photos, 2D photos, or 3D photos, and also video in all of their
same kinds.
360 or 3D formats. And it's pretty easy to just drag and drop. You can plug in via a micro USB cable into the 32 gigs of internal storage, a file, a 4K video file, and say, this is a 180 degree 3D file. Play it that way, and it works.
Now, you mentioned 32 gigabytes. I would like a little bit more. I'd pay $50 for another 32 gigs or 64 gigs.
Or expandable storage.
Oh, absolutely. Because right now, you have to store everything that's on the drive inside of the device, and you plug it in over USB. And every time you do that on your computer, you have to lift up the headset and approve the computer so that it's allowed to drop files on there. But that is how you get things on and off. So if you were to, you can also record videos of what you're seeing on the headset itself. That's how you take them off.
And then in terms of the other experiences, you can also play with a gamepad of their gamepad games. We actually were not able to pair like your Bluetooth gamepad with the headset.
I have a Mad Catz Bluetooth gamepad. Apparently, I wrote Oculus. They said it only supports the Xbox gamepad and the SteelSeries Bluetooth gamepad, both of which you set up using the app, which is on your phone, which you use to initially set up the device, and that's how you get it paired. There's no way to pair within the headset itself without using the phone.
But you played games on this. So what did you think about the gaming experiences?
Well, honestly, I thought some of the games were all right. I particularly like the Coaster Combat, which is a lot of fun. You're in a minecart and you're shooting things. I also thought the ping pong game was all right. And Ultra Wings was fun. They do this interesting flight simulator mechanic where the stick is a flight stick and you're throttling up and looking around and using your instruments. But honestly, Norma, I feel like the games on this are as useful to me as the games are on my phone.
Yeah.
They're not the main event.
No, the main event is media consumption.
I agree.
Yeah, and whether it's media that you sideload locally by just plugging a USB, or media where you're streaming from the Netflix app or the Hulu app or Facebook video.
Or things you've dropped on there.
Or things dropped on there, that is the main selling point for this device.
And the Netflix app is a really good experience. I think John Carmack helped develop it. He wanted to bring that to the Gear VR. And it's the same, basically the same app here. You get to use the full Netflix interface, and you're in this room, and when you start a show, the lights dim down. And if you want, you can actually lie down and watch things by turning on this void theater and just moving the screen to the ceiling. And you can lay down on your couch and watch it on the ceiling.
There are a bunch of also third-party apps that let you tap into media in all sorts of places. There's a Plex app if you have a Plex server, and they have their own living room environment, so you can grow and change the size of your screen. Notable exception is a native YouTube app.
Right.
Yeah.
And there is a web browser, but honestly, it's not a great web browsing experience. That must be why that's in there. They threw that in to get YouTube compatibility.
Yep.
But it's not a good experience. I wouldn't browse the web and do much reading in this at all.
It really feels like there's going to be, a content war right now between the mobile headsets, between Google and their Daydream applications and Oculus and the Facebook applications. That's why they're pushing Facebook video, Facebook Live video so much, is because they're not going to let those apps cross-pollinate. You have to kind of hack your way into YouTube. And even then, you can't even use YouTube TV on this device. That's just blocked on
Now,
here.
you mentioned the Plex. There's other apps you can download that allow you to browse your local networks, but there's no way to do that by default in the device. You have to look at files in the internal storage only. I'm kind of surprised by that. I thought there'd be a network explorer or something.
Right. For any type of media server, there's a Dropbox tie-in, but I found that not very good.
Maybe for photos that's interesting, but
Yeah.
certainly I wouldn't put videos on Dropbox. It's too expensive.
Yeah, the user interface feels very much like a simplified version of the Oculus home interface on the Rift, and there's not a lot of depth there. You're really just launching apps. They're hoping to launch the Oculus TV app, which feels more like an aggregator of other apps, just like a folder.
I think
for apps.
they want it to be like what Apple's done, where they've aggregated the content of all of the apps into a central spot where you can do global search, and it will bring in what it thinks you'll want to watch next. I'm not sure that's what, we haven't spent too much time in it, but it's launching later in May with several partners, including Showtime and some others. So that'll be interesting to see, but if it's just a folder filled with all of your apps, I'm not sure it's that useful.
But in terms of using this, completely agree, it is technically an inferior experience to a 6 Degree of Freedom headset.
Well,
right?
except for the resolution. I mean, you have to admit that the clarity on this is better than the Oculus
But
Rift.
just experience, the type of experiences. You can't get room scale games. I miss having hand presence when I use this. On the flip side, I use this a lot because of how convenient it was to use.
Once you know what it's good at,
Yeah.
it is excellent. For some people, this is going to be the best $200 they ever spent. I honestly think that, because at $200, you're getting a portable movie theater. You're getting Netflix wherever you are, where you are isolated. Part of me going to that hotel room and sitting down and putting on that headset was a real sense of relief, because I could be by myself in the same room with other people. Now that's kind of a dystopian image as well, because I'm now cut off from them. If they have to get my attention, they have to invade my personal space and like shake me or something.
But I also don't think that this is going to be a headset that people are going to go to cafes and Starbucks and use.
Right.
And maybe some people, but I think the vast majority of people who buy this are going to use this in their homes, on their couches, in their offices, and on hotel rooms.
I think it will be a replacement for some people at home for maybe buying a TV. Maybe they're thinking, well, where am I going to mount this TV in my room? I really have always wanted to do that. And that TV was going to cost $1,000, and I'm going to have to put it on the wall and run cables. The TV that you get inside this looks great.
I think it looks very good. I would not go so far as to look great. I think with all these headsets, the black levels are a little bit grayed out for me.
No, you're right.
You see a lot of the pixelization, even with a 1080p video file. You can see the compression.
Right.
All of that is amplified because you're looking through a lens on a mobile display.
Right. No, I think if you're going to go like hardcore, like analyzing the black levels of this as you would like with the HDTV forums or whoever, you're right. That's not what this is.
But from an experiential standpoint,
It's $200.
Sure, yeah,
You know, and I think if you were to have this in your room and you put it on, you have a headset now. People in dorms are going to love this kind of thing just because it's so affordable, and you get a TV. You know, you get a huge TV. The resolution is a nice little bump from the Rift, and it's not something you can't see every pixel on a 1080p video. You simply can't. The entire field of view for each of your eyes is only 1280 pixels. That's 720p at best, and the movie screen is going to be a subset of that. I loaded up some test videos of like 720p and 1080p, and there's a difference in the resolution vertically, but the horizontal resolution, there is no difference because there's just not the pixels to display it.
I remember, 5 years ago, we were spending up to $1,000 with those Sony headsets that didn't have any tracking at all, but let you watch what was essentially a big screen experience.
The HMZ
Yes,
T1.
exactly. This is, I think, better than that, more comfortable than that, and cheaper than that as well.
That was almost $1,000, and it put this little screen in front of you that moved with your head. This is interesting, and as I said, the games are a nice little add-in. Some of the titles they have on here, particularly the ones from Oculus Studios, are strong contenders. I understand Big Screen has they're working on mobile, and they're going to allow you to display your desktop in here.
That would be killer, like Steambox style play a desktop game using an Xbox controller.
Right.
If the latency is low enough and if there's not too much compression, I could see myself doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to get the resolution bump, it might be useful if you're doing any kind of reading, even if it's icon names, to use this at your desktop with your mouse and keyboard as you would a Rift, just to get that resolution bump.
And there's a lot of stuff to do right now, which I think is the important thing. Doesn't feel like a product where you're waiting for people to put stuff out for it. If you buy it today, there's stuff to do.
Because of that Gear VR library.
Exactly, and the media purpose of using this device. You think people are going to buy one or two of these for the home?
Until there's a really rich multiplayer experience, I'm not sure that people will be buying multiple to do things together.
Right.
So it's just going to be like, who wants one? Like everyone in my family, having tried it this weekend, they're all considering it. It's like it's the first giftable VR device at $200. You could make an impulse buy and buy this, or if you're into VR in general, I think you'll probably end up receiving one for your birthday or Christmas, just because it is that price point.
And for people who already have the desktop quality headsets, I think a big question will be, why get this when I can wait for 6 degrees of freedom type experiences on mobile portable displays?
We know Oculus is working on
exactly.
that. The Santa Cruz prototype, we've tried it multiple times. And it's basically this with all this other stuff we've mentioned, the 6 degrees of freedom for headset and tracked controllers.
I think if you have no interest in watching movies or 3D videos in a mobile headset, you can wait. You can wait for Santa Cruz. But if you enjoy watching movies and watching Netflix and you've experienced 3D movies on a mobile headset, I think this is pretty compelling at $200.
I watched all of Star Trek Beyond in 2D. And I didn't care. Like, the fact that it was a 2D movie, I could have taken advantage of the 3D abilities of this, but the fact that I watched that on the screen, it was like I was just in a movie theater. And it was completely acceptable to me to watch even your 2D content, which is all of Netflix.
Yeah, so it's going to be really interesting in the coming months how many people pick this up.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good complement to your desktop displays. And for people who have never used VR, it's going to be a nice first step into the VR world.
Yeah, I agree with you. The lack of 6 degrees of freedom, that's an interesting point. And I think that people who don't understand how much more comfortable 6 degrees of freedom is and how much more enabling it is from an experiential standpoint, there's going to be a couple levels of mind blown. Like, they're going to put this on and say, oh, this is amazing, and then they're going to take that next step once they get to 6 degrees. But I do think 6 degrees is the future. And I think this will be a short-lived moment in the history of VR when we still had components or devices that didn't allow for 6 degrees of tracking. Yeah, nonetheless, it's $200, and I'm not complaining.
It may be the bootstrap that VR needs right now. I want to thank Facebook and Oculus for sending us this early review unit. We'll have more coverage on some pretty exciting other headsets coming out in the near future, so stay tuned for that. But until then, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.